So, we need to talk about risk management. And no, I don't mean stocks, savings, or financial portfolios. I'm talking about energetic economics, how women invest their time, their emotional labor, their attention, their nervous system, and their life force. Because one of the most dangerous myths women are still operating under is the belief that our energy is infinite and that if we just give a little more grace, a little more patience, a little more understanding, we can somehow extinguish a fire that was already burning before we arrived. And this is not victim blaming. This is a conversation for sovereign adults. Most long term follows a familiar pattern. We see the red flags, we feel the misalignment, we sense that something is off, and then we override our own perception because we are attached to a fantasy, a story, a script already written in our heads. And so, what do? We walk into the burning building anyway, holding a small pail of water, convinced it'll be enough. Newsflash, it won't. Today, we're talking about why women must learn risk management not as fear, but as self preservation, why discernment is not cruelty, and why being called cold, picky, or paranoid is often the social task of sovereignty. We're going to break down the Shadow Maiden archetype, the fantasy script that keeps women trapped, and what real world risk management actually looks like in relationships, work, and everyday decision making. Because when you know yourself, truly know yourself, you don't need to spend years recovering from damage. You end the cycle before it even takes root. Settle in and let's dive right in. Hello and welcome. I'm a queen, your holistic strategist, and if I'm not already your strategist, you're leaving power on the table. My work is simple. I help you translate your spiritual awareness, your occult wisdom, and your esoteric intelligence into real world strategy so that your inner evolution actually reshapes how you work, create, love, lead, and raise your lineage. I merge the mystical with the mundane through archetypal psychology, esoteric mapping systems, and holistic strategy. So you don't just know spiritual things, you live them visibly and powerfully. If that's the life you're building, stay here. I invite you to hit the follow button, turn on notifications, and use the link in my bio to stay connected to the deeper work and spaces. Now, before we can talk about red flags, boundaries, or self preservation, we need to redefine what we even mean by risk in this context. Because most women have been trained to think about risk purely in either physical or financial terms, money, stability, security. But money is only one form of currency. The real economy most women are bankrupting is energetic. Energetic economics is about how you spend your time, your emotional labor, your attention, your nervous system capacity, your future potential, and your life force. Every interaction, relationship, job, obligation is an investment. And whether you acknowledge it or not, you are always paying something. And this is where the distortion really comes in. Women are often socialized to believe that their energy is an infinite well, that giving more is virtuous, that endurance equals strength, that depletion is just part of being loving, loyal, or committed. It is not. Energy is not infinite. Attention is not infinite. Emotional labor is not infinite. Energy is not infinite. It is a renewable source, but it can get depleted. And when you treat them as if they are infinite, you start over investing in places that have no return. If we think about where women most commonly overspend, it's often in staying in conversations that drain them, over explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them, pouring emotional labor into dynamics that offer no reciprocity, investing in potential instead of observable behavior, and carrying responsibility that was never theirs to begin with. Now, to really ground this, in reality, to bring it into embodiment, let us look at what this actually looks like on a Tuesday afternoon or a Sunday night. Maybe it is that one friend who only texts you when our life is imploding. You see your name pop up and your stomach physically drops. You're exhausted. You have a big presentation tomorrow and you have not even eaten dinner, but you spend 2 hours crafting the perfect empathetic response. You're scanning a crisis, managing anxiety, and neglecting your own need for rest. You tell yourself you're being a good friend, but in the language of risk management, you just made a high stakes investment in a volatile asset with zero history of dividends. You traded your nervous system regulation for a temporary relief. That is not just being nice, that is a massive capital outflow of your life force with no ROI. That is terrible risk management. Or think of that job where the culture is toxic. The leadership is gaslighting the staff and turnover is through the roof. You tell yourself, oh, if I just stay and organize this one department, I can fix the culture. That is you standing in a three-alarm fire with a small, dainty cup of water. You're trying to structurally engineer a building that was built on a fault line. You're not failing because you're not working hard enough. You're failing because the environment is non viable. No serious investor pours capital into a failing venture simply because they hope it might turn around. But women are taught to do exactly that with their energy. And this is the uncomfortable truth. Most women aren't exhausted because they are doing too much. They're exhausted because they're investing in the wrong places. And energetic economics asks a simple but confronting question. What is the return on investment for where you're spending your life force? Not the fantasy return, not the one day it might change return, the actual observable return right now. When you begin to see your energy as a finite, valuable resource, your standards shift automatically. You stop justifying poor investment. You stop romanticizing depletion. You stop calling self abandonment love. And this is not about becoming rigid or closed, it is about becoming accurate and precise. Because once you understand energetic economics, risk management stops being emotional, it becomes strategic, intentional, and clean. And that is where real sovereignty begins. There's a metaphor I want you to really sit with. Imagine seeing a building on fire. The windows are blackened, the heat is obvious, the smoke is pouring out. And instead of walking away, you step inside holding a small pail of water, convinced that your effort will be enough to put out the blaze. That is exactly how many women approach relationships, work environments, friendships, and even family dynamics. We often don't enter neutral situations, we enter burning buildings. And then we're shocked when we get burned. Now, this is where nuance matters because this is not about blaming women for being armed. Arm is arm. Responsibility for arm always belongs to the one causing it. But sovereignty requires us to hold another truth at the same time. Seeing the fire and choosing to walk in anyway is not the same thing as being ambushed by it. Many women feel the heat immediately, the inconsistency, the emotional volatility, the lack of integrity, the subtle disrespect, the misalignment between words and behavior. But instead of treating those signals as data, they treat them as a challenge. Oh, if I just communicate better, if I give more grace, if I'm more patient, oh, if I love other, that is the pail of water complex, the savior complex. They believe that your individual effort can fix someone else's character, lack of self awareness, unhealed patterns, or a system that was already broken before you arrived. That is not compassion, that is self erasure. Risk management and energetic economics asks a very different question. Is the environment structurally sound or is it already on fire? Because no amount of personal sacrifice makes an unsafe structure safe, and no amount of love compensates for a lack of accountability. And this is where many women get stuck. They confuse endurance with strength. They think staying is proof of maturity, that leaving is failure, that walking away means they didn't try hard enough. But self preservation is not weakness, it is wisdom. Sovereignty is not about saving everyone. It is about knowing when something is not your fire to put out. And the truth most women don't want to face is this: saving others is an unsustainable business model for your life. It drains your energy, it erodes your identity, and it delays your own evolution. A woman practicing real risk management and energetic economics doesn't wait for the building to collapse before she leaves. She doesn't need proof in the form of devastation. She doesn't stay long enough to be traumatized just to justify her exit. She feels the heat, she assesses the structure, and she chooses herself early. That is not cruelty, that is competence. To understand why so many women ignore red flags, we have to talk about the maiden archetype. In a light expression, or in a good expression, or integrated expression, the maiden represents innocence, curiosity, imagination, play, and openness to life. She's the part of us that dreams, explores, and believes in possibility. She's essential. But when the maiden archetype remains unintegrated into adulthood, she develops a very dangerous shadow. And that shadow is illusion and fantasy. The shadow maiden doesn't relate to people as they are, she relates to them as characters in a story she's already written. This is where the fantasy script comes in. Many women enter dynamics with an internal narrative already in place. How it's supposed to go, how the person is supposed to grow, how the situation is supposed to resolve. And once that script exists, reality becomes inconvenient. So when red flags appear, they're not seen as information or data, they're seen as interruptions to the script. And instead of stopping to reassess, the Shadow Maiden does something dangerous. She rewrites reality to protect the fantasy. Oh, she didn't mean it like that. Oh, it's just wounded. Oh, they're just under stress. Oh, once things settle down, it'll be different. This is often justified through what I call weaponized grace. Concepts like, oh, give the benefit of the doubt, lead with compassion, are used not to expand wisdom, but to override intuition, to silence the body, and to ignore the signals of the nervous system. But intuition doesn't speak in full sentences, it speaks in sensation, tightness, and unease. The Shadow Maiden is loyal to the story, not to the truth. And this is the part that matters most. The longer you stay in illusion, the harder it is to actually wake up. Because waking up requires grief for the fantasy, for the future you imagined, for the version of yourself who believed this will be different. And that is why illusion is one of the most dangerous psychological and spiritual states to be in. And it's not because you're foolish, it is because you're often emotionally invested in not seeing. And on a collective level, we can see that majority of humans are stuck in illusion. On a personal level, many women are trained, programmed, and conditioned into it. Romantic illusion, relational illusion, sacrificial illusion. And breaking free requires radical honesty. A woman practicing risk management does not ask, can this be fixed? She asks, what is actually happening here? She does not assign roles that have not been earned. She does not confuse potential with proof. She does not sacrifice clarity for comfort. The maiden archetype is not meant to run your life. She's meant to inform it, then hand the reins to the more sovereign archetypal energies that already exist within you. And until that happens, the fantasy scripts will keep pulling you back into burning buildings, convincing you that this time it will be different. Newsflash, it won't unless you are. Now, once illusion breaks, the next question becomes, what do I actually do with what I see? And this is where many women falter. And it's not because they lack intuition, it is because they don't have a framework for acting on it. Risk management and energetic economics turns perceptions into decision making. The first principle is this: a red flag is data, not a challenge. It is not something to overcome, it is not an invitation to prove your patience and your compassion. It is not a test of how evolved or compassionate you are. A red flag is information about structural integrity. And mature risk management means you don't wait for patterns to escalate into harm before responding. You don't need 10 data points when one clearly violates a non negotiable. Which brings us to the second principle: non negotiables must be defined before you are emotionally invested. Most women try to decide their boundaries inside the heat of a connection when attachment, hope, and chemistry are already clouding perception. That is backwards. Non negotiables are not rules you impose on others, they are conditions required for you to stay. Things like consistency between words and actions, emotional regulation and accountability, respect for time, boundaries and agreements, willingness to repair harm without defensiveness. If a red flag you spot in a person or a system violates a non negotiable, the decision is already made. There is nothing to debate. And the third principle is ROI, which is return on investment. And that is where energetic economics becomes practical. This is where you ask yourself, am I more regulated or more dysregulated since entering this dynamic? Am I expanding or shrinking? Is my energy being replenished or drained? Is effort reciprocated, or am I carrying the emotional weight alone? That is not being cold, that is you being accurate and precise. Staying in misaligned situations has a terrible cost: time you can't get back, nervous system damage, identity erosion, delayed alignment with your higher self. The Shadow Maiden focuses on potential. Energetic economics focus on pattern. And this is a hard truth many women resist. You don't need to explain yourself to leave. You do not need to wait until harm is undeniable. You don't need permission to prioritize your well being. And you do not need to soften your clarity to be kind. Early exits are not failures, they are successes. They are evidence of self trust, evidence of maturity, evidence that you no longer need pain to justify change. A woman with strong risk management doesn't stay long enough to be traumatized. She leaves when clarity arrives, not when the damage is done. And that single shift saves years of recovery work. If risk management is the strategy, then self mastery is the foundation. Because you cannot manage risk if you don't know who you are, what you want, or what actually aligns with your nervous system, your soul values, and your future trajectory. And this is where most women struggle. And it's not because they are incapable, but it's because much of what they believe they want was never consciously chosen. It was inherited from family, inherited from culture, inherited from the media, inherited from society, from romantic conditioning, and from survival patterns. Many women are chasing desires that don't even belong to them. The partner they think they want, the career they think they should have, the life they think will finally make them feel safe or worthy. But when you interrogate those desires honestly, you'll often find that they are rooted in your fear of being alone, your fear of being judged, your fear of being seen as too much or not enough, your fear of deviating from the script. That is what I call the inherited want. And as long as you're living inside inherited desire, your risk management will always be compromised because you will tolerate misalignment to preserve approval. Self mastery begins when you're willing to meet yourself without the mask. And that is uncomfortable because meeting yourself at the soul level often requires grieving the version of you who performed to be loved, the identity you built to survive, the fantasies you used to make misalignment tolerable. And that grief is not weakness, it is often initiation. Most women avoid self mastery, and it's not because it is impossible, but because it actually demands honesty without anesthesia. But here's the reward: once you know yourself, most decisions become quite simple. Not easy, but simple. You stop negotiating with red flags, you stop rationalizing away discomfort, you stop explaining your boundaries to people who benefit from you having none. Self mastery sharpens perception, it refines instinct, and it makes your movement precise. You no longer live reactively, cleaning up emotional messes, processing damage, trying to recover from choices you ignored your intuition about. You live proactively, you choose before you bleed. That is the real defense. Not control or perfection or hypervigilance, but self knowledge. When you know who you are, what you value, and where you're going, very little can attach itself to you that doesn't belong. And that changes everything. Now, this is where it gets a bit more intense. When a woman begins practicing real risk management, something very predictable happens. She gets labeled. She gets labeled cold, paranoid, picky, mean, difficult, or ash. That is not a failure of her character. It is a sign that she has stopped being convenient. See, sovereignty comes with a social task. The moment you stop overgiving, over explaining, and over enduring, you disrupt the roles people unconsciously assign to you. And when those roles collapse, discomfort follows. This is what I call the villainess arc. And this doesn't happen because you've become cruel, if you're doing risk management right. It happens because you've stopped absorbing the consequences of other people's choices. Setting firm boundaries often feels like aggression to people who benefited from your lack of them. Leaving early feels heartless to people who expected you to stay and suffer. Refusing to fix, save, or soften feels threatening in a world that relies on women's unpaid emotional labor. But this is the truth most women need to hear. Being mean in this context of risk management is not malice, it is actually clarity. It is choosing peace over performance, accuracy over fantasy, self respect over approval. When you exit early, when non negotiables are violated, you don't need years of processing, trauma recovery, or public pain to make sense of what happened. You end the cycle before it even roots itself. And yes, people will misunderstand you. They will project onto you. They will tell stories about who you are. Guess what? You should actually let them. Because you're not here to be palatable. You're here to be sovereign. Risk management and energetic economics is not about fear. It is about discernment. Self-preservation is not about selfishness. It is about wisdom and sovereignty. And self-mastery, when it is done right, is not about isolation. It is about alignment. So be discerning, be precise, be mean if that's what clarity looks like from the outside. Pay the price gladly. Because on the other side of that price is a life with less chaos, less recovery, and far more ease. And that is what everything. Now, before you move on with your day, I want you to pause, not to analyze, judge yourself, or to rewrite the past, but to feel what has actually shifted. This work is not about becoming ardent or closed off. It is about becoming precise and actually sovereign over your own energy. When you learn risk management and energetic economics, you stop confusing chaos with aliveness and depletion with love. You stop needing pain to teach you lessons you were already capable of learning through awareness. Sovereignty is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just makes cleaner choices. And the more you practice self-preservation, the less recovery your life requires. You stop needing 10, 15, 30 years to recover because you're able to spot misalignment before it actually takes root. So let this episode, the next one, be an initiation, not into fear, but into clarity, into alignment, and into self-trust. Because you're not here to burn with the building. You're here to choose wisely where you place your life first. So I'm going to give you some integration prompts when you're done with the video. Get your journal out and sit with yourself in a quiet space and explore these questions. You don't have to force anything. Just allow the answers to rise from deep within your core and be honest and truthful with yourself and with the prompt. Number 1, ask yourself, where in my life am I currently investing energy with little or no return? 2, what red flags have I noticed but softened, rationalized, or ignored to preserve a fantasy or a script or my idea of how I want things to be instead of how things are? Three, what are my true non negotiables? And were they defined before or after I became emotionally invested? Four, which of my desires are genuinely mine and which feel inherited, conditioned, or fear based? Five, if I trusted my perception fully, what decision would become obvious for me right now? Six, what would change if I treated my energy as a finite, valuable resource instead of an infinite one? Seven, where am I confusing endurance with strength, and what would self-preservation look like instead? Sit with these questions, journal them, and let them unfold over days and not minutes. Go back to them whenever, wherever, or in whatever situations that you can obviously see that they call for risk management and energetic economy. Because integration is not immediate, but clarity compounds. And this leads us to the end of our lesson on risk management and energetic economics. Was this helpful for you? Please leave a comment, hit the like button, follow and subscribe for our next lesson on sovereignty. And if you're not already in the newsletter, I invite you to head over to the link in my profile or my bio, depending on where you're watching this video, and to subscribe to the newsletter so you stay up to date and you get updates and follow the journey of the Feminine Architecture Manual, where we explore feminine archetypes and how they show up in our work, love, business, parenting, and every part of our human experience. This is about moving from the Shadow Maiden to the Sovereign Woman archetype. So head over to the link in the profile to subscribe to the Sovereign Spiral newsletter or to book a session. See you in the next video. Ciao.